press the red?
Yeah, it's fine.
Now it's working.
And you see the green?
Yes.
Okay. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ta'ala wa ta'alim, wa fa'antiqat, wa dhakara tazkira, wa ifadata, wa istifada, wa ihfadata, wa istiqlita, wa sunnati rasulih, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, wa du'ala al-huda, da'at al-khayr, ibtigha wajhillahi, mardatihi, wa kullihi, wa ta'ala subhanahu. Okay. So this is part of my translation of Prohibitions of the Tongue. Can you all sit where you can see this easily?
But if you go too close, your shadow will be on it. And
now it's fine.
So you're all okay, right?
Yeah.
I'm not
You
blocking
can
you.
do
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so I'm gonna, since we're short on time, I'm gonna skip some of the intro. Okay, so this is a poem. I haven't taught any text more than this text, and this is Fardān, so I'm trying to make that intention for Fardān, I'm trying to get the word. It's 144 lines, and he covers like a lot of the main points related to not only the tongue, even though it's called Prohibitions of the Tongue, but also things that are prohibited or permissible with the eye and with the ears, and how to actually then help yourself. Once you know the rules, then how do you help yourself with that, right? So the first thing he does is he says one of the things you should do, and there's a lot of benefit in this, is just being silent. He says just to be quiet. There's a lot of benefit in that. And he says there's a saying. Let me know when I need to move up. There's a saying where the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, "Al-afiyatu ashatu ajza'in, tis'atun fi as-samti wal-ashir fi al-uzza 'an an-nas." So he said al-afiyah. Basically, he'll say afiyah, but it's afiyah, well-being. So well-being is in everything, like your health, your mental, everything. Like having an easy life has 10 parts to it. 9 parts is in being silent, as-samt. Right? So majority of the times we're causing trouble because we're speaking when we probably shouldn't be speaking, right? And then he said the 10th one, right? So 1/10 of it is sometimes having to avoid people. Al-uzla, right? Al-uzla, i'tizal is sometimes you have to avoid people. So the Shaykh will say it doesn't mean like you completely avoid people. One, that's very difficult. But there are certain situations where you have to say, no, it's better for me not to attend this gathering. And the way you determine it is, for example, if you are invited to a place, even it could be like a Quran gathering or like something really beneficial, but for example, after the dars, there's people that tend to talk about things and you cannot correct them, right? And it's going to cause problems if you're going to correct them, right? So what is your ruling of being there? Okay, so there's something that's nafil to do, right? But it's actually wajib for you to not hear backbiting, for example, right? And if you're in a situation where you can't correct it, then either like move away from that immediate area, right? So the first thing would be to correct it with your tongue, then right, with your hand first, right?
Oh yeah,
and
hand
then
first,
with your
tongue, or
at least feel bad about
in
it in
your
your
heart.
heart, right? If it's and if you can't do any of that, right, then there's certain gatherings that you would actually have to avoid. And I actually can say for alhamdulillah that there's gatherings that I've left, and there's no gathering that I've left that Allah hasn't replaced it with better. Sometimes it's a little bit of a struggle in the beginning because you have to give up things that you love. But I can really say there's nothing I've loved for the sake of Allah except Allah has replaced it with better. Alhamdulillah. You feel that, I miss her, and then after a while Allah just even removes that from like even that missing, subhanAllah. And then you don't come home feeling guilty about, should I have said this? I wish they hadn't said this, and they said this and I didn't stand up for so-and-so person, So he says, the possessor of silence attains salvation with 9 of 10 portions, right? Because 9 are in silence, and the 10th one is, every once in a while you have to avoid people, right? So this is a hadith.
Good question.
Yes.
You know how you said when it's comparison between something that's a nawafil, like a nafil, versus a wajib for you to keep away from that kind of company? But what if it's more than just nafil? Like what if people guise
Parents
it as, or they kind of guise it as fund or something, you know, like then what do you do?
So then you would have to like see, is it really fard for me to
Okay.
attend, you know,
Or
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 are
attend
they just
only the portion that you need and leave.
correct?
Okay.
Yeah. So then you like in you know they have the same in some of the fiqh scholars will say ما لا يفعل كله لا يترك كله. Like if you can't do all of it, don't leave all of it. So sometimes sometimes you have to leave all of it, yeah. But you would just say, you know, I need to go and one of the things I said is that you know how we think about what we're gonna wear when we go somewhere? We should think about like what conversations we'll have. So we should be, like they say in this country, proactive. So we should have like something in mind to talk about. Like for example, like this is a perfect example, you can talk about Spain trip and you can just say, okay, next gathering I go to where I think people might say something, I'm just going to talk about my Spain trip, right? Because then you're talking about anonymous people and you're
But then
talking
people
about positive
thinking you're
things.
showing off.
That's between them and Allah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's
your
between them
intention.
and
Maybe
Allah.
that's what becomes the
Yeah,
problem.
Intention
yeah.
is like
I
sharing
try not to
knowledge.
talk about it until people
Right.
ask me about it, you know,
Yeah.
like because then you don't want
Right, people to show up. But then you can, but that's like one thing to have in your head to say, okay, well, if the conversation goes this way, I can, you know, and a lot of times like you see when they talk about the Shama'il of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, one of the ways he describes that if he didn't like something, and basically he would like, one if it was like bad language or somebody doing something appropriate, so if you couldn't correct them, he would just ignore it, pretend like he, you know, he didn't see it. Yeah, because some of it people are doing why too? Because they want to attract attention, right? And so if they don't get that attention, so
Stop
he,
doing it.
yeah, and that's in the Shema that he would like, it's like,
Positive
I didn't,
reinforcement.
yeah, because when you like, oh, don't say that, or you get angry, it's some
Right.
reaction. So you
Right.
just sidestep the issue. So sometimes that takes care of it, you know, and that's from the Shema. The other thing is then to just change the subject, or let's talk about this, you know, let's, you know, something positive, right? Because I've noticed the other thing, and they say one of the descriptions about the Prophet is he wouldn't say no, and that if there wasn't La ilaha illallah, didn't have la, there wouldn't have been any no in his speech. And I found that there's ways to actually change your conversation without saying actually no. By saying, let's talk about this, or let's do this. And that actually is like, in Arabic they say, jabrul khatir, like, meaning you've kept their, like, izzat rakiya, you know, as we say in Urdu, like you've maintained their self-respect versus saying no, you know, where it kind of, right. You can do that with some people, with some people you just have to be like, just be positive with something else that doesn't have a no in it.
Yeah, but
Does that
like
make
even
sense?
acknowledge them without agreeing with them.
Correct, yeah.
That's like communication too, right? Like so they feel they're heard and they won't keep repeating,
Right.
but then you still continue
Yeah.
with your.
Right, and to do dua about, you know, before going, that, like one of my teachers says, when you pick up the phone, say Bismillah, right, so that will hopefully, you know, or if somebody's talking to you, just making dua that, Ya Allah, I'm not responsible for this conversation, please. Things like that have happened, and sometimes the phone has gotten cut off, and I was like, alhamdulillah, it's such a mercy, like I've seen my duas and my
Technical difficulty.
yeah, alhamdulillah. So I was like, alhamdulillah. Oh, sometimes I've even had it in my heart, Ya Allah, should I be hearing this? Where I knew if I told the sister, she would probably stop. And there's been times where the phone got cut off. And so there's nothing that we've told where it's obligatory for us to do that doesn't become easy if we just take a few steps. And I can vouch for that. Okay, so in line 3, it's 144 lines, so I'm just going to skip around a little bit. He says that, so he says that the reason he wrote this book, he said because of all that's been transmitted from the Quran and the Hadith on all the ill effects of the tongue. And one of the Hadith he mentions is that, and this is really scary, it's a sound narration, so, you know, sometimes people are like, hey, that's not a sound narration. So it's like, he's like, it's a Sahih Hadith. He says, إِنَّ الْعَبْدَ لَيَتَكَلَّمُ بِالْكَلِمَةِ لَا يُلْقِي لَهَا بَالًا فَتَبْلُغُ مِنْ سَخَطِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَظُنُّ. Like a person will utter a word. Kalima in Arabic, it could mean word, or it could also mean, like you say kalima, like shahada is also kalima, so it could be a few words, right? He says a word, and he doesn't think anything of it. لا يلقي لها بالا فتبلغ من سخط الله ما لا يظن. And because of that, he attains a'udhu billah, the anger of Allah, and he has no idea that he's gained the wrath of Allah. A'udhu billah. And then he mentioned another hadith right after it. He says, وَهَلْ يَكُبَّ النَّاسَ فِي النَّارِ عَلَى وُجُوهِهِمْ إِلَّا حَصَائِدُ أَلْسِنَتِهِمْ. Imam Tirmidhi narrates that. He says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are people thrown into the hellfire on their faces except by the harvests of their tongues? Meaning primarily by their harvests of their tongues. So, and then he says in another narration, he says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was the Sadiq and Muslim, so he never told a lie, right? Because he says this, he's like, you won't believe this next hadith. Because he says, the Prophet, it's in Bukhari, Man yadman li ma bayna lihyihi wa ma bayna rijlihi adman lahu al-jannah. The one who guarantees for him, lihyihi is, they use it as, originally it means these jawbones. What's between his lahyehi, so that's the tongue. He guarantees for me that, and guarantees for me what's between his 2 feet, so his private parts, meaning he won't do any haram with it. I guarantee for him, the Prophet said, Jannah. Because they say most of what happens is from one of these two. And alhamdulillah, most of us, the private parts are okay, but the tongue is, we have to use it, right? And that's what makes it the hardest, is that you can't just say, I just won't do any of it, right? We have to use it, and so it's, there's a lot of, that's why, we need to keep getting reminded. So he said that's why I wrote this book, and then these are just some translations of why people are casting it. So he says, line 4, he says, the hearing, the sight, and the sight shall bear witness, and about the two the person shall be asked, just as he will be about his heart. So in the Quran it says a person has 7 lips, correct? There's 7 gates to the hellfire, correct? And we're responsible for 7 limbs, correct? Right? There's 7 limbs. So the tongue, the feet, the eyes, the hearing, the hands, private parts, and a very, very big one.
We talked about that. Very important.
A very big one. That's a huge issue now. That's such a big musibah. And the Prophet said to one of his relatives, he said, if you purify this, your dua will be answered.
The heart. Brain.
Your stomach.
Oh.
So he said, purify your food and your
Yes.
dua will be answered. And now with all the GMO and everything, it's just,
It's
the...
you just cited the 7 things of...
So the 7 things, so Sidi Ahmad Zarruq, who was a scholar, his interpretation of that ayah from the Quran was that he said, okay, we have 7, there's 7 gates, and we have 7 limbs we're responsible for. So his understanding, he was like one of the great ulama, and he said, so what his interpretation was that every time somebody does a haram with that, with a limb, there's a door connected to it in the hellfire. And la qadarallah, that a person doesn't make tawbah and they die, they would enter through that door into the hellfire. And Allah protect us from it. So this was his interpretation of those 7 gates of the hellfire. And so...
But what about people who have really, they're soft-spoken, have really conversations really nice and nothing bad, but intentions are bad, or they're...
So, okay, good point. So then, as far as the heart goes, I told the girls that your heart has 5 types of thoughts. Hang on, let me just pull it up so I'll show it to you. I actually just showed this slide last week. And you're accountable only for the strongest one of them.
Stories of the heart, for the heart.
I'd love to show that to you, but maybe inshallah, maybe past week.
his impact in the history of humanity or the history of humanity was noticed not only by Muslims but even by the West,
close this.
because in the
Okay.
West history.
Okay. Thoughts. So, okay, here it is. So there are, if you look at the one that starts with this category, so each person will have, like there's thousands of thoughts that go through a person, and this is, if you see this arrow, the stronger they are, they're given different names, and the types of thoughts are based on the length of time they remain in the heart. And subhanAllah, that was Sheikh Muhammad who was speaking, and he's the one who actually gave us this. So this last one, that is the strongest thought, and I'll give an example of that. This one, for example, so the other ones they all pass through, and they get stronger and stronger, right? The azima is a thought that's so strong that, for example, somebody had the intention of backbiting somebody, right? And then they never said, okay, Ya Allah, I'm not going to do it. Or they never thought in their heart, I'm not going to do it. But they actually had every intention of doing it. And then Allah Ta'ala, out of His mercy, He sent somebody, or something happened, the phone rang, something happened, and it didn't happen. He is or she's responsible for actually making tawbah for that action, because the azima, that would come under an azima. And this is how Sheikh Hamza explained it to us, is that if it's a negative one, it gets written against you, so you have to make tawbah for it because you had every intention of doing it. If it's a positive one and you didn't do it, it gets written for you. And that's why they also say, like, have a lot of thoughts, good thoughts, right?
How you pronounce the first one?
It's hajis. And those are it just has to do with like how fast they go in and out of your heart. So these two, like hum is actually mentioned in a hadith, like man hamma bi sayyatin wa lam ya'malha. It's not written for him. So hum, if it's this at this level and it's negative, it's not written against it. But if the positive ones are written, so if it's positive, it's going to be written. If it's negative, but it's not at this level, it won't be written. But there are some thoughts, if the person had every intention of actually doing it, they would need to make tawbah from that. So that's where the heart is accountable, right? That's a good question. And then the other side is, and I mentioned this to the girls, that you have 4 sources of thoughts. So these are the categories according to the sense, and these are according to the source. So the Rabbani are like, they're very rare, unless somebody's very, very righteous, like you'll get a sudden desire to like call your mom or get up and pray, or it's very strong, it's possible. That's directly from Allah. There is the Malakani, which are the angelic, and they get stronger, like if you're in wudu, if you don't. There's a hadith that if a person lies, the angel moves away like 1 kilometer. So Sheikh Samir, he's one of the Hanafi fiqh teachers, he's like, what about people who are lying like a lot? If they're not making tawbah, then the angels then you won't get those positive thoughts that they put into your heart. So he was saying, some of the shuyukh will say, like, have a good relationship with your angels, and they'll assist you. And so staying in wudu, because they can smell sin, like we mentioned this sometimes in the Aqidah classes, just like we can smell, physical, like we have they can actually smell sin. So everything we smell that smells bad, that's bad for them also. And also, in addition to that, is sin. And that's why, like, you don't want to have, that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he wasn't allowed to eat anything with a foul smell, right? Garlic and all that, because Sayyidina Jibreel would visit him. And so those things are discouraged for us, for the ummah, to actually, to eat, and especially if somebody's going to the masjid. So, in fact, some of the non-Desis, they'll complain about Desis coming in with that strong smell. And it's actually prohibited to disturb the prayer, the person who's praying, go and walk into the masjid with those. So people should change their clothes before they're around other people. Because one, it's going to scare the angels away, even in the home, because they don't like nasty smells. And then if somebody's lied or done something haram, they need to make tawbah. So they get these positive thoughts, and then because if you don't have the positive, then you'll get the shaitani waswasa, or if the nafs, the human being, the ego is also the ego inclines to good or bad, right? So it'll either go along with shaitan, or it'll go along with if there's the angelic, and if it's purified itself, right? So it just depends. Can I switch? Allah give us tawfiq to. And that's where it really helps also to be with good people, because if you're around people that just always talk about people, it becomes almost the norm. Like you just don't think anything of it, there's that hadith about the person who, the Prophet was explaining backbiting to them, and he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that it's dhikru akhaka bima yakrahu, is that something, mentioning your brother or sister in a way that if they heard it, they would dislike it. And so, the Prophet, the Sahaba said, well, what if it's true? And he said, that's buhtan. So that's, meaning, what if it's not true? If it's not true, that's buhtan. Ghiba is when it's true, and buhtan is ghiba and lies in there. So, and they say in this, he mentions that even if you speak about somebody's car or any possession, like their children, he even mentions like even their dog, because that's their dog, yeah, that's their possession. And so that's why it really helps to be around people who basically I'm very careful, like I won't hang out with people, I don't have time right now, but people, if they haven't studied this in detail, and I don't know, because the default is, in this day and age, people tend to speak, and they get offended a lot of times if you say anything, that I tend to avoid the gathering, and I'll say, Allah give me a company of the Salihin, so Allah give us company of the Salihin, and alhamdulillah, I've no regrets. And so this is my, where we talk about the hellfire. Sayyidina Abu Bakr, he had the title of Siddiq. How did he get that title?
When Prophet came back from Iran,
yeah.
so
they went to him, right? Some of the Kuffar Quraysh, they went to him because they're like, okay, now we're going to get him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So they went to him, they said, okay, he says that he went up to the heavens, and he went to Jerusalem, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then went up to the heavens and then beyond. Because they thought, okay, because the Prophet and Sayyidina Abu Bakr were best friends even before prophecy, right? Mm-hmm. And so Sayyidina Abu Bakr, what did he say? He said, if he said it, meaning I don't necessarily believe you, but if he said it, yeah, I believe him. And so there's a hadith of somebody who continues to be, so it's a spiritual station of being a Siddiq, right? And that Sayyidina Abu Bakr is the head. He's like the leader of the Siddiqun. So if somebody continues to speak the truth, then they will get this spiritual station of being a Siddiq, right? Because Siddiq in the Arabic, it's the superlative form, somebody who's constantly speaking the truth. And there's two types of truths, right? There's the actual speaking of it, and then what's the other type?
In everything,
Okay,
all the
believing,
actions.
right? So there's sins of omission and commission, right?
Right.
So how would you have a sin of omission if it's talking about lies and truthfulness?
By avoiding it?
So if somebody says something in front of me, right, and I act like it's okay,
I didn't correct.
I didn't correct it, and I
I'm
pretended that
silent.
that's okay,
Yeah.
right? Then I'm a liar, but it's a sin of omission,
Yes.
right? So then I'm, if I want to
Indirect
take,
liar.
correct, yeah. So if I knew they would be they would accept the correction. Now, them people getting angry with us is not an excuse for not correcting, because sometimes people get angry, but they'll listen to you, or they might blow up or whatever, but at some point they'll be like, I know she probably, you know what I mean? And so we still have to say something. That's not a reason that's not an excuse for not saying something. I had a sister whom actually, you don't know her, and obviously I won't mention her name. I actually brought her kids for a while. A very righteous sister, but she just had a bit of a temper, and sometimes she would complain about her in-laws, and I would try to change the subject, and I would try to avoid her, and you know, I tried all these different things, and then alhamdulillah, Allah moved her from me, and then one day she called me about something, and she said, and subhanAllah, Allah had it to where she was upset about her husband possibly taking a second wife. And I had sent there was a work, like he was out of a job many years ago, so I sent a work suggestion, not to her husband, but through another friend of ours, right, through her, so that she could, because their husbands were friends. And so I just wanted to do it indirectly for obvious reasons, you know, and so I sent it through her, and then I don't know what happened after the fact. So a few years later, she called me, and she was really upset about that. She said, why did you not go through me? And why did you go through so-and-so or her husband? And then I remembered, and I actually told her, I said, you know, honestly, because so-and-so, she doesn't speak about people. And she's like, how dare you say that? She does. And I said, I really feel she doesn't, because, and she's very careful, she'll only say what she has to say, because you can go to somebody, like if I'm a teacher and somebody comes to me for a ruling, like what's the fiqh ruling of this? My husband's abusing me, do I have a right to ask a divorce? Then you just say what you have to say, and that's it. And I said, and she would say that, and she's very careful, and she would take the correction. So, and this sister blew up at me, and she said, how dare you? And she called me, and so I actually blocked her call.
Wow.
And now she saw me a few years ago, and she was like giving me really dirty looks in a gathering, like a really blessed gathering, and you know, it doesn't feel good, but I told her, like, you talk about your in-laws, and her husband's actually a very righteous person. Okay, mother-in-law's whatever she is, you know, but I don't want to hear it,
Right.
you know, and it's just after years, and very righteous person, you know, but she asked me, so I had to say something. So sometimes you're in a situation, and alhamdulillah, Allah's removed me from her, you know, and her from me. So you just, and then you go home and do your dhikr or whatever, just to get that bad feeling out of the heart that, oh, that didn't feel good.
Sorry, I have to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, inshallah. Sorry, we'll start on time. Next time we won't be measuring shadows. And then he says, yeah.
When you describe that kind of example, I know we talked about it briefly before, but it's different when you can cut someone out if it's part of a community or someone that's just enough, like it's just an acquaintance.
Yeah.
You can live, but what if it's somebody in your house?
Yeah.
What if it's somebody in your house? What if it's somebody in family? And then the fard comes in where I always have to manage the argument is that if you try to correct them,
Yeah.
depending on the audacity of the situation, it
Yeah.
can be like pretty direct.
Yeah.
But then they flip it and say that's very disrespectful. But then it's for their own good.
Right.
But then it's like this balance
Right.
where now I don't know, because I feel like even if that person, if it's they're committing a sin,
Right.
if all their siblings are on their side just because they're the sibling,
Right.
that's wrong, because then
Right.
all of them are wrong. They're feeding the wrong. So
right.
being the one person to correct, everybody thinks it's disrespectful, but
Right.
then I just because everybody's doing it doesn't make it right.
Right.
So how do you? It's for their own good to
Right.
stop them. But I don't.
Right. And you know, it if somebody would say to me it's disrespectful, and you know, probably one of the things I would say is that's like a feeling. It's not like a fiqh ruling. Do you know what I mean? Like they're just, their feelings are hurt, you know, and so you just acknowledge that, right? They're not saying what you're saying is wrong, but it's, you know, do you know what I mean? But they're indirectly telling you that this feels horrible, what you're saying to me. And I would just accept that and just say, sorry, my intention is not disrespect. And then I would not say any more about the thing that you, because you've gotten then I've gotten my point
Pushback,
across.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
then just,
That's the
Yeah.
question, right? Is Allah gonna ask me, did I try hard enough to help that?
I mean, at that point, inshallah, we
When
won't
you
get
make it
asked.
clear.
We do our best, and then you just, you know, the one thing is that if people know that they can't, you're somebody they can't vent with, and people know that with me, that they can't vent with me, that eventually, subhanAllah, and with a lot of dua, ya Allah, please no backbiting, or please no backbiting in Ramadan, you know? I mean, I was somewhere where in the last 10 days, like I was in a home where there was one year, there was so much backbiting. I was like, the last 10 days of Ramadan, and I had to correct this person. One day, subhanAllah, it was being, they were like going on, and I was trying to stand up. Something major happened in the house, like major disaster happened in the house, and I was like, I didn't feel bad, but at some point I brought up the fact that if we do haram, and if Allah loves us, and this is what I tell the girls, that if He loves us, He's going to correct us, because parents correct their children because they love them. So if He loves you and He doesn't want you to go to the hellfire, He's going to correct you now. And there was a big thing that happened that took up days, that then everybody,
If they have to self-check, they will
Yeah.
connect the dots. But
Yeah.
Very,
Yeah, but then at that point I'll just sidestep the issue, or I'll just, they know that I'm very uncomfortable with that. So, okay, if I can't stand up for that person who's been spoken about, they know that they can't do that with me, So that's all we can do, So, okay, so he says that, he quotes this ayah talking about the Siddiqeen. He says, and whoever obeys Allah, this is in Surah An-Nisa, and the messengers, those will be with the ones upon whom Allah has bestowed the favor of the prophets, and the steadfast. Those are the Siddiqeen, the steadfast affirmers of truth, meaning the people who constantly speak truth, the martyrs and the righteous. So it's a spiritual level. It's like below the prophets, but it's a very high spiritual level. It's just,
About
Yeah. Yeah, and we're in the end of time, so holding on to the deen is really holding on to a hot piece of coal, just like it's mentioned in the hadith. And we're going to be surrounded by people, generally speaking, that who are not going to follow the deen. I mean, that's like the general state of the ummah, is people are not worried about their time. They're not worried. I mean, that's the general state. And so it's a norm that people are trying to practice, that they're around people who are not practicing in some way or another. The best thing, the one thing that I've seen that works a lot, is make dua for these people in sajda. Like just repeated dua, Ya Allah, Allahumma jalhum min as-salihin, Allahumma fulana min as-salihin, just like naming them, and just not in the fard prayer, because the Hanafis wouldn't, you can't name somebody in the fard prayer. For the Hanafis, they would break the prayer. But just say after the prayer, just Allahumma jalhum or jalha min as-salihat, just repeatedly saying that, and doing that more for the people who have that issue. Sometimes it's easier to make dua for the people that are righteous, because the heart is softer for them. But the people that are, it's a tribulation for them, because it's worse for them, right? That if they don't correct themselves, because it's either punishment in the grave or la qadar Allah afterwards, if Allah Ta'ala doesn't correct them in this world. And and the one thing, like sometimes when sisters come with husband problems, I'll tell them that you just tell me what I need to know, and then what I don't need to know. If you're venting, it's gonna, and Allah's sending you this tribulation, He hasn't removed it, because you haven't learned what to say and what not to say. That tribulation is just gonna stay. Because Allah, everything is a test, so you have to pass that test, that phase in your life, for that test to go away. And so that's why I was mentioning, like Sheikh Hamza said, the Sahaba had Uhud happened only once, right? Because they learned their lesson, that never to disobey the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even in the hardest of times, right? And that was their bay'ah. One of the Sahaba said, we made bay'ah to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that whether it's easy or difficult, whatever it is, we're going to obey him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So a lot of times, because we're doing the same thing with the tongue, I'll say, maybe, I'm not saying the husband's okay to do what he does, but you can't change him. Like, look at what you can change so that your tribulation goes away, right? And sometimes and venting is not an excuse. Venting is not an excuse. So if you speak to your mother or your sister about your husband, and they're not somebody who can actually go and talk to him and make a difference, you can't speak to them about it. You can maybe come to me and tell me, these are my issues, what can I do to help me? And then
whom only
someone
who can solve that problem.
who can solve it and help you in some way,
yes.
yeah. Otherwise I can't hear it, you know. So if you say, okay, he does this, that, and the other, but then you also say, well, he's lazy. Well, I don't need to hear the part that he's lazy, you know. That would be backbiting, because that doesn't help me give you a role, you know. Because that, is he oppressing you by his laziness? Right? If he is, then tell me what other things he's doing. But does that make sense? A lot of
Be
times
as objective as possible.
yeah, and only the bare minimum for my sake and your sake, so that you get yourself out of this really. One day when I was in Damascus, a sister and I, like, she had a situation come up for her in her house, and there was somebody in the house that was staying with her, I guess, and she was having a lot of problems. You know, sometimes women will, you know. So she started talking to me about her on the way to class, and at some point I started to feel, okay, I've heard enough. And I don't really need to hear anymore, you know. And I didn't correct her right away. You know, we went to class, we came back, and I came home and my recorder was missing. And I was like, I called this friend of mine and I said, you know, I just want to tell you how I felt about the conversation, and now my recorder's missing. And she made tawbah right away. She was also a teacher, and she's like, astaghfirullah. And we went back and we made tawbah and stuff. When we went back to class next time, they had found my recorder and they had saved it for me. And I've seen that, like, in my life, that things will happen, and you just have to say, okay, Allah, what did I do? You know, are you angry with me? You know, did I do something wrong that this happened? That something in the dunya happened that, you know, it's, I mean, it hurts, right? But then it's also like, ya Allah, I hope it's not because you're angry with me. And then you correct yourself and you see that things will become smooth again. And so just to make this life easy, you know, sometimes I'll tell the girls, it's not just for the akhirah. If you don't want to be constantly being corrected in this world because Allah loves you and you're constantly getting tribulation about tribulation, you know, correct yourself now. And if you don't rectify your habits now so that it's not, you don't get like bad habits that are harder to break when you get to my age, right? Did you have a question?
Oh no, I'm just agreeing with what you're saying.
Yeah, so like
I've heard people say that they know those signs, like if they knowingly or didn't speak up when they were knowingly getting into that kind of conversation. The flip side is they will say they find it harder to wake up in the morning.
Fajr.
Or like they have a sign that's correlating to
Yes.
something they must be doing,
right.
and then when you start fixing that, then that
It
doesn't
becomes
happen.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So they can connect it.
Yeah, and the tawbah has conditions. One is to feel remorse in the heart, because there's a hadith, an-nadmu tawbah. Like, so if you did a sin, what do you do now, right? So to not be, to not have the black mark of the sin is to feel remorse in the heart and to intend to never go back to it. And if somebody's doing the action still, then they have to leave it right away, and then inshallah their tawbahs, you know. So it's like, yeah, and then so we have to make the intention, Ya Allah, anything we did in the past, Allah forgive us, and may Allah give us tawfiq to not go back to it. And even if somebody goes back to it, it doesn't negate the old tawbah. That's the Sunni belief, that's a stronger opinion, that even if you fall into it, but you have a sincere intention at the time to never do that sin again, and you feel remorseful, like broken-hearted, that tawbah, inshallah, we have a good opinion that inshallah it's accepted. But then you have to renew your tawbah. And majority of the sins, he says, are related to the tongue, the hearing, and the sight. Majority of them. So that's why most of it in his book, he covers the tongue, the hearing, and the sight. So it's either your tongue, you're saying something, or you're hearing something. Right? And he says, he quotes a hadith, al-'iyanatu ala al-ma'asiyah, ma'asiyah. Assisting somebody in sin is sin also. So for example, I was in Damascus, and you know, I told the girls that what you're supposed to wear when you leave the house is something where, according to the culture, it won't like attract attention, whereas somebody won't look at you and go, wow, you look really dazzling, right? So I said I think this year I haven't told this story, but I have in the past, where I said, so one of my neighbors, she came out and she was wearing it was Eid, and she was wearing something slightly tight, and the color was a little bit bright, and she said, how do I look? And I was like, oh man, if I say something, because you're assisting, you're encouraging that person, right? And he mentions that in here, that if you, first of all, you're flipping what's haram, you're making it halal, and he says that's haram. what Allah has made prohibited, if you make it halal and you're praising it like you praise rulers, oppressive rulers, you're sinful. So I said, you know what, if you wear that in the house, it would be perfectly fine, but I mean, I can't say that that's actually okay to go out. And she's like, what? It's Eid, you know? And
Yeah,
so her
that's
mother's
very
like, I
proud.
told her she shouldn't wear that outside. And I was like, alhamdulillah. You know, so sometimes Allah will send you help. So sometimes we're encouraging people in certain practices and it's completely impermissible. So people will say, what do I say if somebody's wearing something and they're not allowed to leave the house? And I was like, don't say anything.
Until they ask.
No, and then don't praise them if they ask,
Yes.
right? If you can't say, just say, you know, I feel uncomfortable discussing, and then usually if it's somebody like me and they know that it's probably something related to
This
me,
is the most.
they might ask me. They'll say, and I'll say, you know, this is what I was taught. These are the rules for what you can wear when you leave the house, and so this is, you know, and that's why in Prohibitions of Tongues, he says, if you praise something that is prohibited by Allah, you're actually flipping the Sharia, and that's prohibited. Sorry,
Because this is the one, the best topic women have. How does that look like?
Yeah, what is
How's
it?
my dress?
Yeah.
This is the best one.
Yeah.
Okay, did you shop there or something like
Yeah.
that? I'm like totally speechless at that. Okay, I don't know anything
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, I think that's why if we have our own, like, you know, if we talk about things that we have in our hearts, so we have our own, okay, what are we going to talk about next time we call so-and-so, next time? So then we have our own things. Then we can change the subject because we have something to talk about. You know?
We have nothing to talk about it, so they also
No,
they have
about
to change the topic because
Right.
they
but
feel very bored with me.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Then usually those kinds of friends, honestly, I don't, yeah. And if it's relatives, I have relatives who complain about that they, you know, I don't call them and stuff, but it's like I'm not, those are situations where you can, there's other ways you can keep contact with people, is like through gifts or I'll say to my mom, can you say salam to so-and-so, and you're intending to keep in touch with your relatives, or how is so-and-so doing?
Or
Or
somebody falls sick, you visit.
yeah, absolutely. We make the seminar. I mean, these are thousands of miles away, but or you leave a text message on Skype or whatever, you know, saying salam. Like you can do that. Should we stop?
No, it's 6:30.
Oh, 6:30. Okay. We should stop. Right?
Yeah. After.
Okay. So sorry about it late. So inshallah, we won't have shadow measurement next time, so we can start on time.
How long is the dua that you said you were going to do?
Yeah, let's do the dua, whoever wants to start. Let me tell the sister.
The dua Nahariya,
Oh.
right, that we spoke in the beginning,
Yeah,
is that right?
yeah.
Mhm.
I have 10 more of them to do, and then actually. Let me give them.
The notes are not to be seen, hopefully
I
they
think
will.
some of these are,
I told them.
I like it.
I need to give them 10 minutes because I told them 7. So.
I like it.
Let me see. السلام عليكم. نحن على هذا اللايف ستريم عندي قناة في يوتيوب، فأنني الآن على هذه القناة باسمي، إذا أردت أن تجتمعين معنا. جزاك الله خير. Yeah, you can stop it.
stop it?
Oh,
The live stream.
the live stream, they're gonna join live
Oh,
stream,
okay.
so I guess
Okay.
the dua will be on there.
Inshallah.
But can you actually do me a favor? Can you stop it and then start it again? So I